Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. Chronicle 1. The Marked Woman. In the Osage Territory of Oklahoma, April painted the Blackjack Hills and prairies with a delicate confetti of wildflowers. Johnny Jump-Ups, Spring Beauties, and Little Blutes carpeted the land, a spectacle that moved Osage writer John Joseph Matthews to poetry, likening it to the gods themselves scattering confetti. But May brought a subtle shift, a darker undercurrent. Taller plants, spiderworts and black-eyed Susans began to rise, their broad leaves stealing sunlight and water from the smaller blooms. The delicate flowers, starved of life, withered, their petals fluttering to the earth, buried beneath the encroaching green. The Osage, attuned to the rhythms of the land, called it the time of the flower-killing moon. In Gray Horse, Oklahoma, as May unfolded in 1921, Mollie Burkhart, a woman of striking Osage features, high cheekbones framing large, dark eyes, felt a similar chill bloom in her heart. Her sister, Anna Brown, just a year older, had vanished 3 days prior. Anna, vivacious and independent, was known to disappear on sprees, nights of dancing and drinking that stretched into the dawn. But this silence was different, heavier, imbued with a dread that settled deep in Mollie's bones. She missed the familiar, unhurried sounds of Anna moving through her home, the comforting rustle of her skirt, the soft thud of her shoes slipping off at the door. The silence now was as vast and still as the Oklahoma plains. The loss echoed a deeper, older grief. 3 years before, Mollie's sister Minnie had died suddenly, swiftly consumed by a baffling, peculiar wasting illness. A medical explanation that never quite extinguished Mollie's disquiet. Mollie and her sisters, Minnie, Anna, and Rita, were Osage, their names inscribed on the tribal roll, a lineage that had become synonymous with unimaginable wealth. Driven from their ancestral lands in Kansas in the 1870s onto what was deemed worthless, rocky reservation land in northeastern Oklahoma, the Osage had discovered, decades later, that their new territory sat atop one of the largest oil deposits in the United States. Suddenly, prospectors, cowboys, fortune seekers, and oil magnates descended upon Osage County, clamoring for leases and royalties, their hunger for black gold insatiable. Quarterly checks, once meager payments of a few dollars, swelled with each new gusher, transforming the Osage into the wealthiest people per capita in the world. By 1923, the tribe's collective income soared to over $30 million, a staggering sum equivalent to more than $400 million in today's economy. The world became fixated on the red millionaires. Reporters, drawn by the irresistible narrative of the plutocratic Osage, filled newspapers with tales of extravagant wealth. Brick and terracotta mansions rose on the prairie, adorned with chandeliers and opera houses. Osage women, draped in furs and diamonds, drove chauffeured cars and sent their daughters to the finest boarding schools, dressed in Parisian couture. Yet, reporters also reveled in the juxtaposition of modern wealth and traditional ways, marveling at Osage in fur coats circling campfires, cooking meat in primitive style, or arriving at tribal ceremonies in private airplanes, a scene that outrivals the ability of the fictionist to portray. The public, captivated by the rich redskin, seemed both envious and uneasy, struggling to reconcile the image of the poor Indian with the reality of the plutocratic Osage. Gray Horse, Fairfax, and Pawhuska, the Osage capital, became boom towns, fevered visions of the American West reborn and distorted by sudden wealth. Cowboys mingled with New York financiers, bootleggers, and oil magnates jostled for space on streets choked with automobiles, the scent of fuel overpowering the prairie air. Opera houses and polo grounds sprung up alongside rickety trading posts and hastily built cafes. Mollie, though wealthy by any measure, lived with a quiet restraint, a dignity that set her apart from the more flamboyant displays of affluence around her. Her home in Gray Horse was substantial, a rambling wooden house, but it was also a place of family, built near the old Osage lodge of her ancestors. She kept servants, often black or Mexican migrants, reflecting the town's social hierarchy, yet her own demeanor remained grounded, unpretentious. May 21, 1921, was meant to be a day of quiet pleasure, a small luncheon hosted by Mollie. As dawn broke, a habit ingrained from her father's reverence for the sun, she rose, Ernest Burkhart, her husband, rising with her. Ernest, a white man of 28, possessed a rough-hewn handsomeness, a square jaw, slate blue eyes, marred only by a nose that hinted at a life lived on the edge. He'd arrived in Osage County a decade prior, captivated by romanticized tales of the American frontier, and fallen under the influence of his uncle, William K. Hale, a cattleman of formidable and domineering presence in Fairfax. Hale, a surrogate father to Ernest, exerted an almost Svengali-like control over his nephew, shaping Ernest's life and loyalties. While Ernest possessed a roughness, a tendency towards moonshine and shady poker games, he had also shown Mollie a surprising tenderness, learning her Osage language, caring for her diabetes, professing a love that bordered on obsession. Despite societal disapproval, Mollie, drawn to his quiet devotion and perhaps a sense of loneliness in her own world, had married him in 1917. By 1921, their family included 2 young children, Elizabeth and James, nicknamed Cowboy, and Mollie also cared for her aging mother, Lizzie, who had moved into Mollie's home after her husband's death. That morning, Mollie attended to her children, soothing Cowboy's recurring earaches, meticulously directing her household staff as they prepared for the luncheon. Lizzie, however, remained unwell, confined to her bed, her health failing in the wake of Anna's disappearance. Mollie asked Ernest to telephone Anna, hoping her elder sister might come to help care for their mother, a subtle appeal to Anna's sense of familial duty, and perhaps a way to draw her back from her recent troubled path. Anna, the eldest daughter, held a special, almost favoured place in Lizzie's heart, despite her sometimes tempestuous spirit. When Ernest reached Anna, she promised to arrive shortly. She appeared at Mollie's door, a whirlwind of colour and disarray. Bright red shoes flashed beneath her skirt, an Indian blanket, though stylish, seemed hastily thrown over her shoulders, and a small alligator purse swung from her hand. Her hair was windblown, her face powdered in a hurried attempt at composure, but Mollie saw at once that her gait was unsteady, her words slurred, her eyes too bright, too glassy. Anna was drunk, and it was not a discreet, quiet intoxication. Mollie's displeasure was immediate and palpable. Guests were already arriving, including Ernest's brothers, Brian and Horace Burkhart, men lured to Osage County by the promise of black gold, often assisting Hale on his sprawling ranch. Ernest's aunt, a woman known for her virulent racism towards Indians, was also visiting, her presence adding another layer of tension to the already fraught atmosphere. Anna, oblivious, or perhaps defiantly indifferent to the gathering disapproval, seemed determined to ignite chaos. She produced a flask from her alligator purse, the pungent aroma of bootleg whiskey filling the air, a blatant disregard for prohibition and social decorum. Offering swigs to the startled guests, she bragged about its quality, its potency, declaring it must be consumed before the authorities arrived, her words slurring, her laughter too loud. Mollie's concern deepened. She knew Anna had been adrift since her recent divorce from Oda Brown, her life increasingly centered around the reservation's boomtowns, the raucous, morally ambiguous settlements that had sprung up to cater to the oil workers. Places like Whizbang, notorious for dissipation and evil, gambling dens and hidden speakeasies, had become Anna's haunts. Servants whispered of Anna's heavy drinking and very loose morals with white men, rumors Mollie tried to ignore, yet could not fully dismiss. At Mollie's luncheon, Anna's behavior escalated. She began to flirt openly with Brian, Ernest's younger, more brooding brother, a man with inscrutable yellow-flecked eyes and a hint of danger about him. When Brian, oblivious to Anna's possessiveness, asked a servant if she would accompany him to a dance, Anna's playful flirting turned menacing, a chilling undertone in her drunken pronouncements. If he fooled around with another woman, she hissed, loud enough for all to hear, she'd kill him. Meanwhile, Ernest's aunt, oblivious to the simmering tensions, continued her muttered racist pronouncements, loud enough for Mollie and the servants to hear, a constant, grating reminder of the social hierarchy that underpinned even the Osage's newfound wealth. Anna's behavior grew increasingly erratic, the luncheon dissolving into a tense, uncomfortable scene. She quarreled with guests, argued with her mother, clashed with Mollie. She was drinking and quarreling, a servant later recounted. I couldn't understand her language, but they were quarreling. The servant added, a palpable fear in her voice. They had an awful time with Anna. and I was afraid. As evening approached, Mollie, exhausted and worried, planned to stay home, tending to her increasingly frail mother. Ernest, tasked with entertaining the remaining guests, proposed a trip to Fairfax, 5 miles to the northwest, to meet Hale and see a touring musical, Bringing Up Father. Brian, ever watchful, offered to drive Anna home before joining the others. Before Anna departed, Mollie, in a gesture of sisterly affection and perhaps a desire to restore some semblance of order, washed Anna's soiled clothes, prepared food for her to eat, and ensured she had sobered enough to glimpse the sister she knew beneath the layers of alcohol and turmoil. For a brief moment, a fragile peace settled between them, a silent reconciliation. Then, Anna said goodbye, a fleeting smile revealing a glint of gold, and stepped out into the gathering twilight, Brian following close behind. Days bled into a week, and Anna remained absent, her silence stretching into an unbearable void. Brian steadfastly maintained he had taken her directly home, dropping her off before joining the others in Fairfax. Mollie, growing increasingly frantic, sent Ernest to check Anna's house once more. He returned with the same grim report: locked doors, darkened windows, an unsettling stillness. Anna's head servant, living next door, confirmed the haunting emptiness. "I thought the rain would blow in," she explained, describing her attempt to close Anna's windows, finding the door locked, no sign of life within. Anna, it seemed, had vanished without a trace. News of Anna's disappearance rippled through the boomtowns, fear compounding fear. Whispers of Charles Whitehorn's disappearance, a week prior, added to the growing unease. Yet Mollie, clinging to a fragile hope, imagined Anna might have slipped out again after Brian dropped her off, escaping to Oklahoma City or Kansas City, losing herself in the dazzling lights and jazz clubs she loved, oblivious to the chaos and worry she had left behind. Anna, after all, was resourceful, capable of taking care of herself. She often carried a small pistol tucked inside her alligator purse. "She'll be back home soon," Ernest reassured Mollie, his words perhaps more for his own comfort than Mollie's. A week after Anna's disappearance, the prairie yielded its grim secret. An oil worker, climbing a hill a mile north of Pawhuska, noticed something unusual poking from the brush near a derrick. He drew closer. It was a body, rotting in the Oklahoma heat. Between the eyes, 2 bullet holes, stark and brutal. Execution style. A letter in a pocket identified the victim, Charles Whitehorn. Around the same time, miles away, squirrel hunters near Fairfax stumbled upon another gruesome find. A teenage boy, chasing a squirrel he'd shot, tumbled down a ravine near 3 Mile Creek. He screamed, "Oh, Papa!" His father and friend rushed to his side, their eyes falling upon a bloated, decomposing body lying by the mossy creek bank. An American Indian woman, face up, hair tangled in the mud, vacant eyes staring at the sky, worms feasting on her decaying flesh. The hunters fled the ravine, galloping to Fairfax, dust swirling in their wake. Unable to find lawmen, they stopped at the Big Hill Trading Company, Scott Mathis's general store and undertaking business. Mathis, alerted, dispatched his undertaker and several men to the creek. They hauled the body from the ravine, a gruesome weight in a wooden box, and dragged it to the shade of a blackjack tree. The undertaker, attempting identification, covered the bloated corpse with salt and ice, the body shrinking, life's essence seemingly draining away. He knew Anna Brown, but this was almost beyond recognition. It was as black as a nigger, he later recalled, the racial slur a casual echo of the pervasive prejudice of the time. Mathis, managing Anna's finances, contacted Mollie. A grim procession formed: Mollie, Rita, Ernest, Brian, Bill Smith, and a morbidly curious crowd, including Kelsey Morrison, the bootlegger, and his Osage wife. The stench at the ravine was overpowering. Vultures circled, obscene scavengers in the hot sky. Mollie and Rita approached the body, the face almost entirely gone. But Mollie recognized the Indian blanket, the clothes she had washed for Anna just days before. Then, Rita's husband, Bill, with a stick, forced open the corpse's mouth. Gold fillings glinted in the decaying flesh. "That is sure enough, Anna," Bill Smith declared, his voice heavy with dread. Rita began to weep, led away by her husband. Mollie, her face a mask of composure, finally mouthed a single, devastating word: "Yes." It was Anna. She turned and retreated with Ernest, leaving behind the vultures, the stench, the bloated corpse, the ravine, leaving behind the first, chilling confirmation of the darkness that had begun to consume not only her family, but the heart of her world. A coroner's inquest, a vestige of citizen-led justice, was hastily convened at the ravine where Anna Brown's ravaged body lay. Jurors, white men chosen from the onlookers, including Scott Mathis, were tasked by the Justice of the Peace to determine the cause of death, act of God or act of man. The Shaun brothers, summoned once more, began a second autopsy, their instruments glinting in the harsh sunlight. The brothers leaned over Anna's corpse, their faces grim. They examined the bloated flesh, the mud-caked hair, the remnants of clothing, searching for clues. The heat shimmered, flies buzzed, the air thick with the stench of decay and oil. Time of death, roughly 5 to 7 days, they estimated. Then, shifting Anna's head in the wooden box, James Shaun exclaimed, "She's been shot!" A small, perfectly round hole marred the back of her skull, a .32 caliber entry wound. Murder, not accident, not natural causes. Lawmen, Sheriff Freeze's deputy, and the Fairfax town marshal, amateurs in forensic science, joined the grim scene. Their mission: find the bullet, the murder weapon. The Shauns sawed through Anna's cranium, extracting the putrid brain, probing with a stick. No bullet. The brains were in such a bad shape, David Shaun explained, you couldn't trace the bullet at all. It was gone, vanished. The lawmen scoured the creek bank, finding bloodstains, a discarded moonshine bottle, but no bullet. 2 sets of tire tracks offered a fleeting clue. Unskilled in forensic methods, they failed to cast the tracks, dust for fingerprints, or collect gunpowder residue. The crime scene, already contaminated by onlookers, offered little more than unanswered questions. An earring, salvaged from Anna's body, was brought to Lizzie, Mollie's mother, confined to her sickbed. Lizzie, frail and fading, recognized it instantly. Anna was dead. For Lizzie, a woman clinging to the old Osage ways, it was a profound loss, a sign perhaps that Wakon Ta, the mysterious life force, had withdrawn his blessings. Lizzie's health worsened, grief becoming its own consuming disease. Mollie, composed as ever, leaned on Ernest for support, his quiet devotion a stark contrast to the chaos and fear engulfing them. She organized Anna's funeral, a costly, elaborate affair. Undertakers, vultures circling the Osage fortunes, demanded exorbitant prices. Funerals had become another form of exploitation, a final plundering of the red millionaires. The service began at the church. William Hale, a pillar of the community, a figure of respectability, served as a pallbearer, a somber presence amidst the mourners. The priest's chants echoed through the church, the rhythmic Dies Irae, a lament for the dead, a plea for eternal rest. At the Grey Horse Cemetery, beside her father and sister Minnie, Anna's final resting place awaited. "Meet me in heaven," her tombstone read. The coffin lid remained sealed. Anna's face too ravaged for a final farewell, for the traditional Osage face painting that guided spirits. Instead, Mollie and her family placed food within, provisions for Anna's spirit's journey. The mournful chants of the Osage elders rose above the gravesite, prayer songs interwoven with sobs, a lament for Anna, for Lizzie, for a world slipping into darkness. The wails faded, replaced by the dull thud of soil on the coffin lid, the silence of finality. The killings of Anna Brown and Charles Whitehorn ignited a firestorm of speculation. Theories abounded, but Sheriff Freeze's investigation stalled. Mollie, frustrated, turned to William Hale for help. Hale, the king of the Osage Hills, vowed to bring justice. He hired a private detective, Pike. Mollie's family also hired detectives, former Burns Agency operatives. The private eyes began their investigations, uncovering clues and dead ends, rumors and lies. Anna's alligator purse, mysteriously emptied, was found at her home. Phone records revealed a suspicious call. Rose Osage became a suspect, jealousy whispered as a motive. Oda Brown, Anna's ex-husband, remained under a cloud of suspicion. But as investigations floundered, more Osage died. William Stepson, poisoned. Joe Bates, poisoned whiskey. Oilman Barney McBride, brutally murdered in Washington, D.C., a warning sign. The death toll climbed, fear gripping the Osage Nation. Conspiracy believed to kill rich Indians, headlines screamed. In January 1923, another Osage, Henry Roan, vanished. Weeks later, his body was found in a car in a ravine, shot execution style. The reign of terror continued. a dark cloak of mystery and dread settling over the Osage Hills. Electric lights, frayed lights, sprouted outside Osage homes, feeble defenses against an unseen killer. In April 1923, Governor Walton dispatched state investigator Herman Fox Davis, a former Burns operative, to Osage County. But Davis, too, proved corrupt, taking bribes, eventually pleading guilty, a further betrayal of justice. Then, W. Vaughan, the Pawhuska attorney who had been working to solve the murders, vanished, his body found by railroad tracks, stripped naked, the documents he carried gone. The death toll climbed, at least 24 Osage dead. The black curse of the Osages, declared the Literary Digest. Where will it end? No one knows. The Osage Tribal Council, desperate, formally requested federal intervention. John Palmer, the tribe's advocate, pleaded with Senator Curtis, warning of demons and the most foul series of crimes ever committed in this country. While the tribe waited, Mollie, consumed by fear, retreated into her house, her health failing, her spirit broken. She gave her youngest daughter, Anna, to a relative to raise. Then, in late 1925, a message reached the local priest. Mollie wasn't dying of diabetes, she was being poisoned. The word reached Washington. The Bureau of Investigation was about to enter the bloody, tangled heart of Osage County. Chronicle 2, The Evidence Man. Tom White, a seasoned Bureau of Investigation agent, was summoned by J. Edgar Hoover to take on the Osage murders. Hoover, seeking to reform the Bureau and salvage its reputation, needed White, a cowboy, to succeed where others had failed. White, accepting the perilous task, assembled a team of experienced agents and plunged into the complex case files. He aimed to build an unbroken chain of evidence, separating fact from rumor in the tangled web of hearsay and misinformation. White's investigation began by methodically eliminating suspects. Oda Brown, Rose Osage, and the oil camp ruffians were ruled out. The focus shifted to Brian Burkhart, whose alibi crumbled under scrutiny. Witnesses placed Brian and Anna together hours after he claimed to have taken her home. A third man emerged in the accounts of Anna's last night. Private Eye Pike, hired by Hale, resurfaced, revealing he'd been tasked with creating a false alibi for Brian, implicating Hale and Ernest Burkhart in a cover-up. White suspected a mole within the investigation, leaks and sabotage hindering their progress. Pike himself became suspect, seemingly involved in extortion and obstruction. The deeper White dug, the more William Hale emerged as a central, sinister figure. Hale's past, his wealth, his power, all cast a long shadow. White examined Hale's life insurance policy on Henry Roan, uncovering forgeries and manipulations. The motive became chillingly clear: headrights. Mollie Burkhart and her family, systematically targeted, their wealth funneled, death by death, towards Mollie, and through her to Ernest Burkhart, Hale's nephew, his puppet. Mollie, once expected to die young from diabetes, had become the ultimate prize, her life, and her headrights, coveted by Hale. The federally imposed guardianship system meant to protect the Osage had become a tool of exploitation. Guardians and administrators, often prominent white citizens, preying on their wards. Congressional hearings, meant to oversee Osage finances, seemed to only further scrutinize and control the tribe, while local officials, often in Hale's pocket, turned a blind eye to the growing body count. White saw the Osage murders not as isolated incidents, but as symptoms of a deeper, systemic corruption, an Indian business that thrived on greed and prejudice. The oil auctions, the $1 Million Elm, were not just symbols of Osage wealth, but also magnets for predators. The curse of oil wealth was not Osage extravagance, as the press portrayed, but the ravenous appetite of those who sought to steal it. White, driven to build an airtight case against Hale, knew circumstantial evidence alone wouldn't suffice. He needed direct testimony, a confession. He turned to the outlaws, the very dregs of Osage County, hoping to find a crack in their criminal code, a vulnerability to exploit. Dick Gregg, the stick-up man, offered a tantalizing lead: Hale's attempt to hire the Al Spencer gang to kill Bill and Rita Smith. Gregg's refusal, and Spencer's, revealed a twisted code of outlaw honor, a line even hardened criminals wouldn't cross. But Gregg's testimony, without corroboration, remained fragile. Witnesses, those who might implicate Hale, had a disturbing tendency to disappear or die suddenly. Curly Johnson, Henry Grammer, Asa Kirby, all potential sources, all dead. Grammer, the quick-draw bootlegger, conveniently killed in a car accident. Kirby, gunned down in a staged robbery. Johnson, poisoned whiskey silencing him forever. White, pursuing these phantom witnesses, felt trapped in a wilderness of mirrors, a hall of echoes, where each step forward seemed to lead back to the king of the Osage Hills. Hale, untouchable, seemingly untouchable, reigned supreme. But White, the relentless evidence man, refused to yield. Then, a flicker of hope in the deepening darkness. A tip led White to Bert Lawson, a prisoner at McAlester Penitentiary, a man with Osage County ties, claiming knowledge of the murders. White, desperate, rushed to McAlester with Agent Frank Smith. Lawson, a fidgety man with ghostly white hair, confessed. Ernest Burkhart, he claimed, had approached him, then Hale himself, offering $5,000 to bomb Bill Smith's house. Hale, Lawson said, even provided the fuse, demonstrating how to use it. Lawson, initially refusing, finally yielded after Hale, exploiting Lawson's legal troubles, promised to pay his attorney fees. Hale and Ernest drove Lawson to the Smith house, delivered the nitroglycerin bomb, then vanished into the night as Lawson planted the explosives. The explosion, the escape, Hale and Ernest collecting him afterward, Lawson detailed it all. White, cautiously optimistic, felt a surge of momentum. "Have confession from Bert Lawson," he telegrammed Hoover. "Congratulations," Hoover wired back. But White, the seasoned lawman, knew confessions could be fragile, motives murky. He pressed forward, dispatching agents to verify Lawson's account, even as doubts lingered. Lawson's story, while detailed, felt too neat, too convenient. Despite the lingering questions, White felt the urgency to act. Comstock, the attorney, now faced credible death threats. Mollie Burkhart, isolated and seemingly poisoned, was fading. White moved swiftly, securing arrest warrants for Hale and Ernest Burkhart for the Smith bombing murders. Ernest was apprehended at a Fairfax pool hall. Hale, initially vanishing, dramatically surrendered at the sheriff's office, impeccably dressed, the king of the Osage Hills playing his final role. Both were jailed in Guthrie. White, facing Hale, found him defiant, convinced of his invincibility. Ernest Burkhart, however, seemed vulnerable, the weak sister, White thought. In the makeshift interrogation room, the box, White and Smith questioned Ernest relentlessly. Ernest denied everything, even Lawson's confession. But White pressed, revealing the mounting circumstantial evidence. Ernest, visibly agitated, wavered, a flicker of remorse in his eyes, but fear of Hale held him captive. After midnight, the interrogation ended. Ernest returned to his cell, still defiant. Then, a new twist. Hale, boasting a perfect alibi, claimed to have been in Texas at the time of the bombing, producing a telegram as proof. The case seemed to be collapsing. Hale's lawyers tipped off the press, headlines proclaiming his innocence. Desperate, White turned to Blackie Thompson, the outlaw informant who had betrayed the Bureau. Against protocol, White had Blackie transported to Guthrie. Blackie, chained and guarded, was brought to the interrogation room. He was hostile, but when White mentioned Hale and Burkhart, a change flickered in his demeanor. Blackie revealed that Hale and Ernest had approached him and Curly Johnson, offering them the Smith killing. Blackie described the car theft, the payment, their refusal to murder a woman. Blackie's testimony, while bolstering the case against Hale, was still just another outlaw's word. White, however, used it as leverage. He brought Blackie face to face with Ernest Burkhart. Blackie, in chains, declared to Ernest, "I have told them everything." Ernest, finally broken, crumbled. That night, White was summoned back to the interrogation room. Ernest, exhausted and defeated, was ready to talk. He confessed, not to the murders themselves, but to his complicity to Hale's grand design. Hale, Ernest said, had masterminded the Smith bombing, aiming to secure Mollie's fortune. Lawson, Ernest revealed, was a liar, a red herring. The real bomb maker was Asa Kirby, Henry Grammer's soup man. And Henry Roan's killer? John Ramsey, Grammer's cow thief, hired by Hale for a mere $600. Ernest implicated Hale in everything, a torrent of confession pouring out. White, finally seeing the outline of the conspiracy emerge from the fog, dispatched agents to arrest John Ramsey and re-arrest Kelsey Morrison, the double-crossing informant. As authorities moved to secure their suspects, a doctor was sent to Mollie Burkhart's house. She was near death, poisoned, not by diabetes, but by a more insidious, deliberate hand. Justice seemed within reach. But the battle was far from over. The king of the Osage Hills, even in jail, still held considerable sway. Chronicle 3, The Reporter. The trials of Hale and Ramsey began in Guthrie, Oklahoma, captivating the nation. Hale, confident, projected innocence. Ernest Burkhart, the prosecution's star witness, initially testified against Hale, detailing the murder plots. But Hale's defense team, masters of manipulation, turned the trial into a circus. They accused the FBI of coercion, claiming confessions were beaten out of Hale, Ramsey, and Ernest. Hale himself took the stand, dramatically recounting alleged torture by White and his agents. Ernest, under pressure, wavered, recanting his confession, claiming FBI coercion. The jury in Hale and Ramsey's trial deadlocked. Undeterred, White pressed on, uncovering evidence of jury tampering and witness intimidation by Hale's associates. Ernest Burkhart, however, in a dramatic courtroom reversal, changed his plea to guilty, confessing his role and implicating Hale. "I'm through lying, Judge," he declared. Burkhart's confession broke the dam. Hale and Ramsey were retried for Roan's murder, and this time, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. Hale, the king of the Osage Hills, was finally brought down, sentenced to life imprisonment. Hoover, seizing the narrative, hailed the Osage case as a triumph for the FBI, a showcase of scientific policing, conveniently omitting the earlier missteps and the countless unsolved murders. White, the quiet evidence man, faded into the background, his role minimized in Hoover's self-promotion. The Osage, however, recognized White's dedication, their tribal council issuing a formal resolution of gratitude. White, weary, accepted a new role, warden of Leavenworth Penitentiary, overseeing Hale and Ramsey among his inmates. Justice had been served of a sort, but the deeper corruption and prejudice that enabled the Reign of Terror remained unaddressed. Decades later, a reporter, David Grann, revisited Osage County, seeking to uncover the full scope of the murders, a history largely forgotten. He met with Osage descendants, including Mollie Burkhart's granddaughter, Margie, and delved into archives, uncovering a wider, more systemic violence than previously acknowledged. The murders of Anna Brown, Lizzie, Rita, and Bill Smith, and Henry Roan were just the tip of the iceberg. Charles Whitehorn, Mary Lewis, George Bighart, William Stepson, and countless others, victims of a brutal, relentless greed for Osage oil wealth. The Reign of Terror, Grann discovered, was not just Hale's conspiracy, but a reflection of a deeper, more insidious evil, a culture of corruption and prejudice that permeated Osage County and beyond. The Indian business, the systematic exploitation of Osage wealth, extended far beyond Hale and his henchmen. Guardians, lawyers, bankers, doctors, undertakers, and even lawmen all profited from the plunder, complicit in the murders or actively concealing them. The official death toll of 24 was a vast underestimation. Scores, perhaps hundreds, of Osage died during this dark period, their deaths often misclassified, their stories untold. Grann's investigation revealed a chilling truth. The Osage murders were not a closed case, not a neatly solved mystery. Justice, in its official form, had touched only the surface. The deeper wounds, the systemic corruption, and the unacknowledged scale of the Reign of Terror remained unhealed, a haunting legacy for the Osage Nation and a stain on American history. The blood of the Osage, Grann concluded, still cried out from the ground, a demand for remembrance, for a fuller accounting of the darkness that had descended upon the flower-killing moon. If you enjoyed this book breakdown, please consider liking this video and subscribing to get notified when we post our next book.